So hello and welcome. My name is Angela Jubinville. I'm from QIP. I use she, her pronouns. And we're here today as a part of the K12 community of practice around using post-secondary data. And we have a regular speaker series where we ask experts to come in and talk about a topic of interest. And then there's discussion among the community about the topic. And the idea is for the speaker to present a resource that might be useful or interesting to you, or a topic that would be useful and interesting to you. So today we have QIP's own Denise Lawson. Denise supports the K12 community of practice, in particular the Action Fund, of which some of you are current participants. And Denise is presenting today on the topic of data literacy and how that can support post-secondary success. So I'll give it away to Denise.
Hello, everybody. I'm going to see if you can see my screen first of all.
We can.
Okay, great. Just trying to get it going here. Okay, so we're going to talk today a little bit about data literacy as it relates to post-secondary success. I'm going to make this kind of a little bit of an informal presentation because I would like people to have the opportunity to talk and reflect a little bit about challenges that you encounter in your own work world in terms of data and using data and communicating about data. Okay, whoops. All right. So when we talk about post-secondary outcomes and why post-secondary outcomes matter, we're focusing on college enrollment, persistence, career readiness, employment, and other indicators of how students are prepared for life after K12. And many of you are already working with many different data sources. Outcomes, of course, are central to accountability frameworks and funding models. And who uses the data? Educators, counselors, data analysts, administrators, all have a role in interpreting and acting on the data. So why is data literacy so important? Data literacy isn't just for the data analysts who look at the data and evaluate the data. Everyone in the education ecosystem needs to be equipped to ask the right questions and interpret the findings and ultimately make decisions. Why we talk about data literacy is if you misinterpret data, the interventions might not be the right interventions, or if you make the wrong assumptions, instead of identifying root causes, there are impacts that can happen all the way down to the student level. When you have data literacy, you can do a better job at identifying gaps, whether it's by subgroup, program, or pathway. Career counselors in particular can tailor supports to meet student needs and aspirations, and educators can align instruction with post-secondary expectations. I have a background of working a lot with creating materials on career exploration for career counselors that all had data behind it. So we're just going to focus a little bit more on that from a discussion standpoint. So really, how do you understand the outcomes and what outcomes are being measured? I mean, we talk a lot about post-secondary outcomes, but there are different types of outcomes. For example, you might have FAFSA applications completed, or college persistence, and how are you defining that and how are you measuring that? It might be credential attainment. So what credentials did a person receive, or are they attempting to receive? There might be certificates or badges in addition to formal education, and that's kind of a new thing that's coming out even more these days. How are these metrics calculated? And then there's the data that's there and the data that's not. Sometimes people or subgroups might be missing from a data set, or there are trends and you're trying to understand what is behind the trend. How do I explain the trend? And we'll talk a little bit more about some of these things, but ultimately, from the user perspective, you're trying to understand, what's in the data and what's missing from the data. And then from the creator perspective, you might be trying to grapple with how do we communicate findings clearly to different groups, whether it be other data analysts, to students, to families. And then we always want to make sure that we're using data ethically and equitably. I'm going to pause for just a minute before we get into more depth and just open it up. How is your organization currently using post-secondary outcomes data? What questions are you trying to answer? But more importantly, trying to look at what are the barriers that you face in interpreting or acting on that data? And what would help increase data literacy in your role? And you can feel free to add into the chat, or just Angela, you can call on people if people raise their hand, just to kind of get the discussion going a little bit. I can stop the screen share if that's helpful. How about we have how many of you on the call, we have kind of data producers and data consumers. We have a comment from Sarah here. Let's see. We struggle with its definitions. Do you want to elaborate a little bit on that?
Sure. So, hi, I'm Sarah. I'm from Idaho, and I would say I work at the State Board of Education. I think it's coming up with common definitions. So, at the board office, we may have one definition of what we mean by enrollment. Our institutions may have their own definitions of enrollment. And so, when you are putting out different reports, how do you have synergies so that the people who are supposed to be digesting this information don't think that you have bad data coming out of the two different locations?
That's a fabulous example. And that's one of the key things we're looking at. And we have someone saying, persistence versus retention. So understanding terms is very, very important. We have another comment coming in, providing to school counselors to have them determine needs in their community and district. I think there are so many challenges out there, but starting with language is very important. And the example that you brought up about, enrollment, being sure that you're actually focusing on the right definitions when you're reporting data is very important. So we'll go on and talk a little bit here. So one of the other things is, establishing a clear vision and purpose for data use. So if you understand how the data will be used and how it aligns with the agency's mission, and being sure that goals for how it will be used are clearly articulated to support teaching, learning, equity, and operations. And again, ensuring that that vision is communicated consistently throughout the organization. So building a data literate culture, providing professional learning opportunities for all staff, but also tailoring training for different roles. Teachers, administrators, career counselors, for example, all use data in slightly different ways. Focusing on both technical skills, which might include data analysis, but also conceptual understanding of data interpretation, bias, and storytelling. Encouraging staff to ask questions and use data to explore root causes. And one thing that we're trying to do with the community of practice and the Action Fund is making data actionable. So trying to tie findings to specific programs, policies, or supports. And then not just reporting on data, but also looking at data as a way to set improvement targets, test interventions, and monitor results. But in order to do all of that, you need a data literate culture. So some of the tips are collaborating across roles. So helping to involve, analysts, counselors, educators, administrators in cross-functional teams that analyze data and act on data together. So if you have the data analysts who have the knowledge about the data quality and can help guide interpretation, in the career counselor side, they can provide the context and student level insights. Educators obviously looking at instructional or curriculum adjustments, and administrators leading that strategic planning and resource allocation. And always, there's that data privacy, governance, and ethics part. Staff need to be trained on FERPA and other data protection policies. So sometimes in the attempt to get down in the weeds and look at subgroups, we also have to be very careful about ensuring data sharing agreements are in place and protecting individual privacy, especially when working with institutions and others in the school districts. Following policies for data privacy, security, sharing, and usage, and then fostering ethical use to prevent misuse and misinterpretation. So I mentioned before, we have the concept of data producers and data consumers. Both need data literacy. So the consumers are the individuals who interpret, use, or make decisions. Their primary goal is to understand and use the data, which might include, we mentioned some of these already, educators, school leaders, counselors, policymakers, could even be, vendors who create tools for schools, and the data producers who create, collect, manage, clean, or model the data, ensure the data is accurate, structured, and useful for others. They might include the data analysts, data scientists, IT staff, researchers, and coordinators. We talk about both because you need literacy on both sides. So, for example, looking at data quality. So, if the data you're looking at wasn't collected correctly or isn't complete, so like the data needs to include all of the expected or required information. Are there missing records, blank fields, incomplete entries? Do you have data for all student groups if you're trying to do something to report on an entire school district, for example? Have you excluded certain groups? Incomplete data can lead to inaccurate conclusions or inequitable decisions. We also have to look at, is the data valid? Does the data measure what it's supposed to measure? If a survey was put out to measure learning or engagement, did the survey measure what it was supposed to measure? If the data aren't valid, they can lead to ineffective decisions or actions. And of course, accuracy. The data needs to be accurate and not contain errors. So, it could be everything from typos, miscalculations, misclassifications, inaccurate scores, or inaccurate program participation data. Even small errors can lead to misleading patterns. And are the data reliable? Do the data produce consistent measures over time? Are data collected in consistent ways? Reliable data helps ensures that changes reflect real differences versus inconsistencies in how the data are collected. Because ultimately a data visualization, if you have a dashboard and you have visualizations, the visualizations are only going to be as good as the data behind it. So what are the sources behind a visualization? Are the sources accurate? All of the things we just talked about with data quality, does that apply to the data? Is the data complete? Is the information biased? Are visualizations clearly labeled? So we had the comment earlier, do you know, the terminology? Is the terminology explained? Does the data visualization include titles, timeframes, populations, and sources? Common data interpretation pitfalls. The big one, which I'm sure you've all run into, is confusing correlation with causation. Just because two things occurred together doesn't mean that one caused the other. So students who attend after-school programs get better grades. That might not necessarily be the case. So you always need to consider other factors and not jump to conclusions in the data just because you have an observation in a trend. Overgeneralizing from small samples. This is another very common thing. You might have a small underrepresented group or unrepresentative group of your entire sample. And, like you see one class started a new curriculum and they did well, so it works for everyone. That's not necessarily the case. Small groups may have results that vary more by chance, and you need to think carefully about that when analyzing data from small groups. Cherry picking data is another one that happens sometimes where people use data that supports a preferred decision. So it's kind of after the fact, well, let's look at test scores increased, highlighting a test score increase without showing that other scores dropped. So it might be picking a group that did well and ignoring other data. So when you do that, you can have decisions that are very misleading by only choosing the data that supports a hypothesis, for example. And another pitfall is taking action without actually understanding the data. So making policy or instructional changes based on surface level findings or assumptions. So, for example, if a large number of students are failing math, jumping to the conclusion that the curriculum needs to be changed might not be the right approach. There might be other factors that come into play. So considerations when examining post-secondary outcomes data, we talk a lot about equity, but equity is not just about access, it's also about outcomes. So post-secondary outcomes, often you don't really see the trends until years after high school. So following cohorts over time to understand trends and patterns is important. And also looking at how different data sets can be used together, such as K12 data and post-secondary data like National Student Clearinghouse data and state longitudinal systems. Another consideration, and in this day and age, is how AI can be used, and the role of AI in post-secondary outcomes data analysis, and also just in terms of being data literate now, it's kind of adding in that other aspect of how can AI be a tool for analyzing outcomes and offering insights. And again, we talk about different roles. So an educator who might be interested in learning more about predicting student performance, personalizing insights, and identifying early interventions. So AI a lot of times can be used for early warning systems, that type of thing. For career counseling and career pathways, AI can be useful for helping to match or even doing labor market analyses to guide students towards more informed decisions and personalized choices for their futures. School administrators can use AI to look at program evaluation, resource optimization, and drive strategic planning. And same with at the district level, looking at policy impact analysis or equity studies. There are many different potential applications at different levels with different roles. And then I did want to close. QIP has a new data literacy online course series. The first one is going to be available soon, which talks about kind of what is data literacy, understanding data sources and data quality, kind of key components around data analysis and interpretation, data-driven decision-making, and privacy and ethics. So this was really meant to be kind of a brief overview of some of the key topics in data literacy. There are many, many scenarios that are encountered on a daily basis, whether it's, you're putting together a report and you're missing some data. So it's not complete, but somebody is asking for the report now to make decisions. So, how do you deal with the day-to-day challenges that come up and make sure that you're dealing with data ethically and you're looking at outcomes ethically and you're making decisions based on evidence. So, those are some of the challenges. Now we've kind of primed the conversation a little bit. Does anybody have any challenges that they would like to discuss or things that they have encountered in the workplace on dealing with data and data literacy? Or I'm going to throw the other side out as well, or any positive things or things you've done in your workspace that have really helped to promote data literacy.
I can share, Danielle from Iowa. We have been trying new this year to really connect the ASCA data set models that are being asked of our school counselors to what we want them to analyze through the data that we have at the state level. So really trying to connect and not make it an extra piece that we want them to be looking at their own data pieces, but making it so they understand why they're doing what they're doing at their school district and having that conversation. But it's been a difficult task to get moving in that direction because a lot of them are unable to find the time to collaborate with their co-counselors and not always getting the full readout of their data pieces from the district. And so that's part of what we're dealing with. And then I also put in the comments, one of the struggles that we have really great data pieces available to our school counselors, but one that we constantly get stuck on is we have a large number of students that start college but don't persist and don't complete. And we're struggling because of the FERPA stipulations to get information about why that's happening. And is there anything that could be done at the high school level to support students as they jump into that college life that would help with that persistence?
Yeah, that is a challenge. And that is, that's why some of this is so hard. I don't know if there's anyone else on the call who has come up with strategies to deal with that problem. I mean, I think it's kind of like having that continuity and the communication so that everybody understands what's needed, but that losing data out into the future when you don't know what happened and why. And again, that brings it back to trying to figure out that causality piece. So why are some students persisting and others are not? And these key challenges that sometimes more data sets can help, but if you lose what happens to the students after, then that's challenging.
Hello, I'm Jill Marecki with Detroit Regional Dollars for Scholars. So I saw somebody else was going to unmute. I was just going to share on that from a community-based organization perspective. Students choose to remain in our program throughout their post-secondary experience. So we do have that data and are able to kind of survey our students directly and text them and, send them a care package and to the address on file and do all sorts of things like that on a small scale. So yeah, um, we're trying to explore different ways to make that more known. We have really good relationships with our high school partners. And so trying to share some of what we do from the community-based organization, could they do that on a similar scale for their high school students for their whole district? And then the other piece of like working with post-secondary partners. When I was working and advising in a charter high school, I did have some agreements with the post-secondary institutions to have a flagging system, and with a data sharing agreement to say, hey, we'll send you, the student agree, everybody was on the same page of sending, quarterly, semesterly reports, but we only had that for certain post-secondary partners. So we're looking at that. We're looking at that with some of our top attended institutions to say, okay, could we just like try out what would it be to have a flag on our students going to your institution for like an early alert? So, okay, they're not meeting SAP, or we're seeing these early indicators that they might drop out. Let's tag Dollars for Scholars. So that is something we're hoping to kind of get the infrastructure around to try out. But again, at a very small scale from community-based organization, and I'll reply in the chat to the other question.
Okay, that's great. That's all great information. And the other part of what was brought up in terms of like the career counselors and the communication and the time struggle that people have, obviously in terms of serving student populations, making sure that all of the people in their roles are adequately trained to understand, why it's important to have complete data, how to appropriately use the data when counseling students. Does anyone have anything to share around that aspect in your organization?
Can you repeat the question again, Denise?
Oh, I was just referring back to what Danielle had brought up about the career counselors and, kind of their time commitments, but struggling also sometimes with having incomplete data, and then trying to make sure that everybody is getting what they need and communicating what they need, and maybe understanding how to use, like if you have dashboards, like how are you ensuring that that people understand how to correctly use the dashboards, whether they're using them directly with students or whether administrators are using dashboards to make decisions, or teachers are using dashboards to try and figure out what interventions to use with which students. Because all of that, everybody needs to understand how to use data appropriately and effectively. We have a comment, Kirchi Basu. We're trying to create systems where we check in about the data dashboards on a monthly basis with site leadership. So I just wanted to open it up and see if anyone else had any additional comments on that aspect.
I think for us, we've got a really strong dashboard for FAFSA completion, but I feel like FAFSA completion is pretty cut and dry. It's either they've completed or they haven't. And I know there's factors in which would pop up if they like haven't completed fully, but we get that information. I think our struggle is in the additional pieces that are necessary for a student to be able to actually attain and get to college, and not sure how to set up some type of data gathering or dashboard to support those steps and those conversations.
Yeah, that makes sense. Then Kirchi, you brought up that you're using data to understand program efficacy. Do you want to describe some of what you're doing to the group?
Yeah, hi, my name is Kirchi. I work with College Possible. I'm on the national team, and we are kind of like supporting sites by making sure that we are tracking things like KPIs and like I was literally like creating like kind of like a match and fit dashboard earlier today where our CRM is Salesforce, and we have like our proprietary, which it's called Copilot, to help, which was named before Microsoft Copilot came out, which is like aimed to sort of be able to track things about like student application, student persistence, like engagement with our program, et cetera. And we've had a lot of changes in our program recently. So we're trying to kind of like get how do I say it? Like aligned in how we are looking at that data, reporting that data out with our program site leadership. And so we're like looking at, for example, like number of students that are engaged or enrolled, and then how many sessions they've had, and then how many colleges they've applied to, and then like, or have they like built a list, and then have they applied to college, and then have they been accepted, and trying to like kind of create a dashboard that helps like roadmap that out. But it's tricky because often there are certain data points that are like not being updated in one way, or one site is like tracking data a different way than another one. And so like really trying to make sure that we're all on the same page of like what we're looking at and how that's being seen. We're getting pretty close, I think, to feeling like we're really aligned across all 7 of our sites, but it's still definitely a work in progress, and excited about this community of practice or the QUIP group to keep thinking about this and talking about this.
And who are the primary users of your dashboard? Just
Yeah,
for the
so
benefit of others here on the call.
yeah, we have like direct service providers, right? Our DSPs who are like working directly with the students, but then their leadership, who maybe are reporting that data back for grant purposes or are compiling those for reports, impact reports, things like that. As well as like leadership who were kind of holding accountable to this data and being like, hey, what's going on? You only have X% of your site has actually applied to four-year college, like, and being able to kind of approach those conversations with curiosity and being like, hey, can you tell us what's going on? Like, would love to know a little bit more and how we can support you and help you through any challenges.
Thanks for sharing. Appreciate that.
And I wanted to give a quick plug that, Kerchi, I'm not sure if you know that Derek from College Possible will be coming to our November speaker series to talk about the Copilot resource. So just a little plug for November speaker series.
Great. And then just to reiterate, like part of the purpose of this, we do want like this sharing that's happening right now is fabulous. And, a lot of you may be grappling with similar challenges. So kind of sharing what's working, what's effective or what's not, and reaching out to the group. This is kind of an opportunity for you to do that, not just listen to us talk, but we want to introduce the topic and have you guys engage. And in Idaho, Sarah says, we have a tool for the state that allows counselors to see not just FAFSA completion, but also applications to college via our state common application, as well as in-state insight into financial aid applications and awarding. That's great.
And Denise, I wanted to pop in the chat and see if folks had ideas, you and others on the call, to respond. So I just pulled out when I asked at the beginning, what do you hope to get out of this? This were some of the comments that were made from you all. And I didn't know if Denise or anyone on the call had some ideas to address this directly, or if there was a conversation that we wanted to have around any of these thoughts.
Well, I will start the conversation and then others can jump in. I kind of focused in on interest. Someone said, I'm interested in strategies for communicating data concepts effectively. And again, this kind of underlies everything. The communication piece is so important. We had the comment brought up earlier about, terminology, what is meant by enrollment. That is one of the principles of in your organization, ensuring that when terms are used, they are defined. How are we defining enrollment? How are we defining persistence? When you are reporting on data, ensuring that whenever a report is created, and you as a data user, you can ask these details. As a data producer, you need to produce those details. What time period does the data cover? What populations were included in the data? And definitions for key terms. And, when scales are used, in ensuring that, the visualizations accurately reflect, that you have the whole y-axis in there, that you're not chopping things off and just showing a portion of the scores, so that people can really understand what they're looking at. And that's the one, if there was a key takeaway, I would say is always look at data critically, to look at where did the data come from. I put in there some of the key components. Is it complete? Is it valid? Is it reliable? Is it accurate? There are other factors to consider as well, like timeliness, especially for decision making, and to take that inquisitiveness into anytime you're looking at a data report, rather than just looking at it as it's given to you, but ask the thought-provoking questions, which might relate to that other question, how to best create questions. And I'll leave it to see if anyone else wants to respond before I respond further, just to get the ball rolling. I mean, we also have the comment, help my team better understand how to use data to support students and how to talk with partners about data. So again, whenever you have an audience, that's kind of the first step, right? Who is your audience? What is their level of data literacy? How familiar are they with the terms? So if you're using more complex terminology that potentially, for example, a student might not understand, then you need to figure out, how do you explain those terms in plain language at a student's level, or it could be a parent's level, or it could be somebody who English isn't their first language, and then you have complex statistical terms, or even terms like persistence. What might that mean to somebody who's not familiar with the term? It's a term we all use a lot, but if you're a student, do you know what persistence means, or retention? And if you're trying to, counsel a student to have better persistence, I'm not sure that would be the best terminology for them. So I think understanding where your audience is coming from is always the first step in understanding how to most effectively communicate with that audience. And sometimes too much data can be overwhelming. So, I'm going to distinguish this from cherry picking. So you're not cherry picking data, but you're presenting people with data sets that are appropriate for the use that audience needs it for, and not including extraneous things that don't pertain to them. Those are some tips. And, that's one thing we will be covering a lot of this in kind of our future. We're going to have some future courses in our data literacy series that will delve deeper into some of these topics. But that just as a starting point.
Yeah, I was gonna chime in for an example on some of the things you sent. In Michigan, we have a pretty good statewide data set, but it is a little overwhelming to sometimes navigate all of the different tabs, especially, not being at a district with that student level data of like trying to figure out what is going to be helpful. And so, recently I was able to connect with the team that kind of oversees their the post-secondary outcomes data for the state level, and just had a really helpful call to like walk through the different features on the website to kind of see. I've clicked around and just like stared at graphs and tried to pull different reports, and it's not always I could go down a very long rabbit hole and then be like, wait, what was I trying to get? So it was nice to have a refresher with somebody who's an expert in those reports that they've created to walk through what might be most helpful. If there are like state webinar, if you're from a state agency, like even just like a webinar, or if that's a static kind of video that people could watch. I get a ton of newsletters from, Michigan College Access Network, and that would be like such an easy thing to plug, so that, counselors or people that might be data interested, they might not be totally data literate. It might just be a good like starting point. And then they also had updates recently, and so they're transitioning everything over to Power BI, and so they're getting used to that, and now there's like much more capabilities than from when I first looked at it years ago, and have kind of stumbled through making it work for me. So I would just say, as an example, like that was a good starting point for me and got me thinking and asking more questions, so that I was like, oh, do all of my school district partners have, user logins here? Like who's active? Could you tell me which of my sites are active? And so, yeah, send me the list and I can tell you if they have anyone logged in, and then I can, then I can go back, and it's a next best step. Like otherwise you might just be sitting there overwhelmed, and what is the first step? And so honestly, for me, it was just like, okay, well, I better just try this out and then see what goes from there. Yeah, just as an example.
Just to piggyback on that a little bit, I mean, in this day and age, obviously, everybody is overburdened and doesn't have enough time. So when you have data reports or you're producing data reports, producing that how to read this report guide for somebody can just really go a long way. Or like Jill mentioned, having a video that explains how to use it, and it may differ depending on your role. So those are kind of things to keep in mind if you are involved in producing data. And then, the training aspect that Jill brought up, like being able to have your staff attend training on how to use data effectively can save a lot of time later. If you really understand what you're looking at, you can better understand, either how to query what you're trying to find, or, more effectively use a dashboard if you get a little extra training. So that's always something to consider. Any other comments or questions?
Hi, Lee from Delaware. One of the concerns that we kind of face in Department of Education is when we give a dashboard or data sets, there will be sometimes that policymakers, leadership, legislators will cherry pick, and they will say, okay, well, we are familiar with the SAT, so that must be the benchmark, without actually looking at any of the other broader components of what it means to be college ready. And so helping, people quickly understand large data, helping them to learn that it's a story. It's not just one data piece that we're going to say makes or breaks a student is really a challenge for us. And so I look forward to the future on like coming up with some ideas on how to quickly, efficiently respond to policymakers and leaders, but also making sure we are not cherry picking and, doing a disservice to what being college ready really looks like for students.
That's actually great. But again, that ties into that communications piece, right? The storytelling. When you can tell accurate stories from the data that really give life to the trends. And, but it's always that balance though, right? So it's, you don't want to inappropriately indicate correlation or causation, but sometimes, a story is an observation. It's something you're seeing in the data. And I think you brought up a great point about, one pitfall of dashboards and things like that, where the user can just pull what they want to look at. And, if somebody's narrowing in on SAT scores and they're not considering what other indicators of college readiness might be, that's where, again, AI down the road, if you're leveraging AI in terms of your analytics and predictive models, understanding what other factors also contribute, sometimes AI can be the thing that also suggests that you look at something else, or have you considered this data piece? So those are some strategies that could be used down the road to help with that, to make sure people are not excluding data that should be considered. So just food for thought down the line.
I appreciate that, because the other way that I see it happening in school sometimes is when we share the dashboard and the principal sees it and says, oh, our SAT scores. are not where we want them. So we're going to make an entire block where everybody has to do SAT prep. Like that is not a data informed decision of impact. So I'm excited in the future, you're right, to see what those tools will allow us to do at all different levels so that the data is being used in the best way to support students.
Yeah. And I do think that, all the emerging trends with, digital credentials and badging and other ways of capturing skills and capabilities that students may have. Maybe they did an internship and they, acquired certain skills. Like right now, a lot of the systems aren't really capturing, everything's kind of structured around the traditional, how to get to a four-year college or even to a community college. But, what to do with those badges and certificates that might identify a skill that a student has that makes them career ready or adds to their college readiness. And right now, the systems are not all in place to be able to capture all of those other things. And that's where it's kind of like, bringing people together like all of you can help to also identify, well, where are the gaps? Are you able to get all of the data that you're trying to get? Do the systems exist to capture that? And hopefully forums like this will help to shape maybe where things go down the road. And that is a thing too, like a lot of times, the virtue of data collection and data, you're collecting data about things that happened in the past, right? That's what ends up in your database or repository. But what we're trying to do more and more is predict what's going to happen in the future. But the whole, even what data is generated is continually evolving and changing. So it is a challenging landscape. And, that's, I think why people are looking towards technologies that can do a better job of identifying the patterns where we can't hard code everything in there. Because by the time you do it, then there's some other factor that you've neglected. So, so it's definitely a challenging time. But I think just what Lee just said, that whole, like when people see data and they want to make a knee-jerk decision to fix it, oh, our SAT scores are too low, we need to do this, or our FAFSA, we need to do this with that. That was kind of what I was bringing up in the, one of those pitfalls, either to have a knee-jerk, we got to do something to fix it, so you just throw something else at it, and then you're not really going to understand the, what is causing what. Did this intervention work? So I think someone had asked, how do you ask the right questions? So one of the things when you're asking the questions, it goes back to that, are you asking the right question? Are you measuring what you want to measure? And, so, that's where your data scientists, you need to have those structured methodologies in place to, come up with your hypothesis, gather the right data to test your hypothesis and monitor. If you're asking the wrong questions and collecting the wrong data that doesn't measure the question you asked, then it's all flawed from the beginning and no dashboard is going to help you. So that's where, sometimes technology makes it too easy to generate reports, generate pretty pictures and data visualizations, and forget about the data relationships and underpinnings behind it all. And that's a whole nother can of worms, but very important to make sure those underpinnings on the technical side are correctly aligned.
Well, thank you so much, Denise, for the presentation and the discussion, and thank you all for the discussion. I just have a couple of plugs before everyone runs off for the rest of their day. I'm going to put in the chat a link to register for our next meeting, which is actually our quarterly meeting. And when you click on that link, it'll give you a slightly longer description of what we'll discuss as a community. And then, as I mentioned, November, our speaker series will be back. More information on that to come. And then I will send a follow-up email that has the recording to this meeting, the link to register to the quarterly meeting, probably the link to register for the November speaker series, potentially if we have that created. And then once our QIP's data literacy course becomes available, you'll all know about that as well. So hopefully I didn't miss anything that I'll be communicating to you. And any other questions or comments before we close?
And thank you all for coming.